Hello, it's been a while, but today I'm releasing the next major update of MakeTile, and it's a big one. This update includes a series of features to allow you to add doors, windows and props to your tiles. It also includes the first release of the Asset Manager, which, while still a bit rough around the edges, makes creating complex layouts and adding materials with MakeTile much easier, since you can now simply drag and drop materials onto a tile, or drag a tile into the scene, as well as creating and saving your own assets for later. Blender 2.92 includes the first version of its own internal asset browser, and in future, MakeTile will be compatible with this. So if you save a tile, an object or a material as an asset in MakeTile, you'll also be able to use the Blender internal asset browser to access it, as well as accessing it through the MakeTile asset browser. However, at the time of recording this, 2.92 has just entered beta, and this isn't possible yet. Over the coming months, I intend to refine and develop the MakeTile asset browser to make it a bit more full-featured than it is now, but the current version is usable, if basic. As this is its first release, I do expect there to be quite a few bugs, and if you find any, please let me know. So currently the asset browser is implemented as a separate add-on from MakeTile. To get everything working correctly, make sure that you first of all remove your current version of MakeTile. Once you've done that, restart Blender. Install the new version of MakeTile and the asset browser. And make sure that they're both activated. While we're here, it's worth making sure that the 3D Print Tools add-on is also activated. So this comes with Blender, and MakeTile can use this to make sure that when you export a tile, all of the geometry is correct, so you don't have any errors when it comes to print them. So once you've installed the Asset Manager, if you press N, you'll see that there's a new tab in the right-hand menu. So there are three top-level categories: collections, objects, and materials. And if you click on collections, you'll see that an asset bar pops up. If we go over to tiles and walls, you'll see that we now have a load of tiles which are included in the paid version of MakeTile. You can close the asset browser at any point by pressing escape, and then to open it again, just navigate to a new category. So you can drag and drop tiles into the scene as you would expect, and you can then interact with them in the same way as you would a MakeTile tile which has been created using the MakeTile menu. So there is one limitation on this at the moment, which is that when you drag a tile in from the asset browser, usually you can turn on and off the booleans here. Now this will work sometimes, but there are a couple of instances where it won't. So here you can see that I've dragged in the first tile and then I've selected the second tile, and it's turning off the booleans on there. Now I will fix that, but for now, if you do want to turn off the booleans on a tile, the easiest way of doing that is going down here to the modifier properties and just finding the boolean and just clicking on the little disable button there. So if we go to the materials section of the asset browser, you can now drag and drop materials onto your tile rather than having to mess about in the MakeTile menu. So these materials will be added to the vertex group, the textured area, which the mouse is hovering over when you release it. If you've got a object in your scene which doesn't have a material on it, so I'm just like this cube here, and you drag and drop a material onto it, then it'll add it as the default material. So, as I said, the asset browser is still sort of, this is the first pass. And one thing which is quite obvious here is that the materials, the renders of them aren't particularly good. It's quite hard to see what the material actually is. So, one of the first improvements is going to be adding the ability so that when you hover your mouse over a material, it gives you a sort of a full scale preview, and also just changing slightly the way that the material preview is rendered so it's clearer what it is. So one of the other sort of slight weirdnesses with it is that when you navigate away to a category which doesn't have any assets in it, then you still are left with this blank asset bar. The obvious thing would be to have, the subcategories in here as a folder. So we're currently in the materials category, and in future you'll have a special folder, a wall folder, or a floor folder. You can just, navigate through those by double clicking on them, but that's not been implemented yet. So currently you just have to navigate through the categories using the menu here. It's not particularly elegant, but it does work. So you can add and remove categories exactly as you would imagine. So there's a little plus button. We can create an example category in here, and then we can create a subcategory in here, and then you can just delete those. And when you delete a category, it will delete all of the assets that are contained in that category. So just, remember that. It's just like deleting a folder on your computer. It does pop up a warning asking you, do you want to do this? But once you've done that, you can't undo it. So you can move assets between categories. You just need to click on your asset and then right click and select cut asset. If I just, again, create a little example category, paste asset. There we go, that's been moved. I'm just going to put that back where it should have been. You can also delete assets by right-clicking on them and selecting Delete Selected Asset. That will give you the option to also delete the blend file that the asset is saved in from the disk, rather than just deleting it from the library, from the cache. Okay, so I'm just going to press Escape because I don't want to do that. So the other thing which you can do is you can edit the metadata on your assets. So if you right click on an asset and click on Edit Metadata, it will show you the name, the description, the path to the file where the asset is stored, the path to the preview render, and then you can add in the author, the license, the tags. And in future, you'll be able to filter by tags and by author and that kind of thing. But again, that's a little bit of a way down the line. So now we've seen how you navigate around the asset browser and find stuff. Let's have a look at how you actually save things as assets. So we'll start with the simplest example, the easiest example, which is objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete my default cube. And I'm going to add in a traditional monkey. So I'm going to add in my Suzanne monkey, and I'm going to switch over to Evie. You can see that Suzanne by default doesn't have a material on her. So I'm just going to add a plastic material to her. And this means that when the preview render is done, it'll look right. Otherwise, it'll just too shiny and it just will look a bit crap. So to save an object as an asset, so I'm just going to create a new subcategory called example. All you have to do is select your object, right click on it, and save active object to MakeTile library. That will bring up a little dialog which allow you to name your asset, put in a description, author, license, tags, etc. Click on OK. And first one you save, it might take a moment to render the preview because it has to load in a preview scene and stuff, but it's usually fairly quick. So there we go. So we've now got Suzanne in our asset browser, and I can just, drag and drop Suzanne into the scene. And if I, create a, new folder or a new file, sorry, then when I bring up my asset manager, as you would expect, Suzanne is there. You can also save multiple objects in one go. These are some dungeon props I've got from a pack I bought ages ago. I'd actually have to look up where these are from. But I want to save all of these assets. Again, it's dead simple. I've made sure that they've all got a material applied so that they render correctly and that they all have their origins in the center. And this will just make sure that when they're rendered, that they're appearing in the right place. I'm just going to select them all and right click, and I'm going to go save all selective objects to MakeTile library. It'll bring up again a little pop-up, and you can put in, a description, license tags, author. This will be applied to all of the objects. Just click on OK, and then wait a moment or two, and it'll glitch slightly. But basically, it's going to render the previews for all of them and save them to your library. So now we've covered how to save objects. Saving materials is very familiar. You can do it in two ways. The first one is you can come down here and you can just click on Save Material in the MakeTile menu. Or you can navigate to the category where you want to save your material and just right-click and click on Save Active Material to MakeTile Library. Now this will bring up the usual pop-up menu and you can fill out the details, and there's two other options. So here we have displacement material, and if this is a MakeTile type displacement material, then keep that checked. If it's an ordinary material, you can save those to the MakeTile asset library as well. Just make sure you untick that. And then you can choose the preview object you want your materials to be rendered on. There's just two at the moment, which is a floor or a wall. Click on OK. And there we go. It's been added to our library. Now, it does take a little bit longer to render the previews for the materials than it does to render the previews for collections and objects, because it has to do the sort of, make 3D bit, which does take a little bit of time, as you'll know if you've used MakeTile. When you make a tile in MakeTile, what you're actually doing is creating a collection of objects. So if I make a tile, and then I go over to the outliner over here, what you can see is that I've created lots and lots of objects. So I've got my base and my core, which you can see. And then we've got all these other objects, which are actually hidden. They're invisible. And they're what make up the pegs and the cutters and that kind of thing. Now I can make them visible just by going here and switching them back on, and they're all rendered as wire just for ease, but there's lots and lots of objects there which normally you don't see. So if you want to save a tile for later reuse, what you need to do is you need to save the collection. This works in pretty much the same way as with the objects and the materials, but there's a couple of extra options which you need to set. So I'm just going to go over to my asset manager. I'm going to navigate to a collection. I'm just going to create an example collection again, navigate into that. And then I'm going to right click on an object in my tile and select Save Active Objects Owning Collection to MakeTile Library. First of all, I need to name this. So I'm just going to call this Open Lock Wall 2-inch. And then I need to select the root object. So the root object is basically the base of the tile. It's what the other objects will be parented to. And it's what, when you select it and move it around the scene, everything else will follow that object. So you can either have it as none, in which case MakeTile will add an object, or you can change that to the base object. And that's usually just called the tile name straight wall, in this case, .base. Then you need to make sure that you've got the collection selected, so the straight wall collection. And objects in Blender can belong to more than one collection. So just make sure that that's the collection that has got the core and the base in it and all the other objects. Collection type is going to be tile. We'll cover the other two options in a moment, and then you've got all the usual options. Click on OK. MakeTile will do its stuff, and then you can just, drag and drop your tile into the scene. Now, I said a moment ago that as well as being able to save a collection as a tile. You could save it also as either an architectural element or an other type collection. Now, another type collection is just for any collection you want to save. The architectural element, however, is quite special, and this is how we add doors and windows to our tiles. And that's the other new major feature in this release. So I'm just going to exit out of that and go over to my asset manager. And I'm going to come to the architectural elements collection. Now here I've just got a couple of doorways. I'm just going to drag one of these out into the scene. Okay. And then I'm just going to move this so the origin, the root here, is the same place as my tile. So I'm just going to clear the location by pressing Alt and G. Okay, so this is a doorway, a wooden doorway, but obviously it's not cutting into the tile or anything, so let's fix that. So I'm just going to select an object in my doorway collection. I'm going to select an object in my tile. I'm going to right click, and then I am going to select add collection to tile. And automatically a hole has been cut and the doorway has been parented to the tile. So if I now grab the base of my tile, you can see that the doorway moves with it. Now this is a MakeTile object, just like the tile. So if I come up here and select the doorway and select the ground piece and select the tile as well and go make 3D and then wait a few moments, then these have all been made 3D. Because this has got a wooden material on it, that needs to go up by a couple of extra levels so that everything is displayed correctly. So that's how you add the architectural elements to your tile. As you'd expect, when you export this, it will, be included with the tile. Okay, so let me show you how to take a collection of objects that you've modeled and set it up and save it to the MakeTile library so you can use it as a architectural element which will cut holes in your tile and do that cool stuff. So what I've got here is I've got a collection of 4 simple objects which is going to be used as an arch doorway. So I've got this arch object, I've got a floor piece, and then I've got these 2 objects which I've set to be displayed as wire, and I've done that by setting their object properties to wire here. Normally they're textured, wire. And these are going to be used for cutting holes in our tile. And this one is going to be used to cut holes in both the tile and also in this and this. And that allows you to basically take a bit of wire and feed it through the doorway. And then you've got like a door hinge and a door which works. Right, so what one can do first of all is I want the arch and the floor bit to be usable with the MakeTile material system. So I'm going to first of all convert them to MakeTile objects. And I can do that by coming down to the object converter, and I'm just going to click on this and click on convert to MakeTile object. Okay, I'm currently in viewport mode, so I just want to switch that over to Eevee so I can see my texture. Okay, so this object's now been converted into a MakeTile object, which means it's got a material on it. If I click on Make 3D, you'll see that it extrudes. Now, the material has been added to the entire object, which isn't really what I want. So I'm just going to click on Return to Preview there. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to select the all textured areas. I'm going to click on Remove on my plastic material, Remove on my smooth stone floor material. Then I'm going to select the top and I'm going to click on Assign Material. And now when I make that 3D, it's just going to be assigned to the top. Now I'd already set up this object with these vertex groups. So if I come down here, you'll see that that's the top vertex group, the front vertex group, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there's a video on my YouTube channel about how you can set up an object for use with the MakeTile system and create these vertex groups. I'll put a link to that in the comments. Okay, so that's that bit done. I'm just going to return that to preview, and I want to do the same thing on my arch. Again, I've set it up with a couple of vertex groups. So we've got a textured vertex group and a untextured vertex group, and I just want the material to be added to the textured vertex group. So I'm just going to go down here, convert to MakeTile object, and then I want to remove that material, and I'm going to change that to smooth wallstone and assign that material. Excellent. Right. Okay, so there's a couple of things I still need to do to set this up. So first of all, I want to have a hinge. I want this boolean to cut through the door frame and the floor bit. So I'm just going to manually add a boolean modifier to these two. So I'm going to add modifier boolean and difference. I'm going to use the fast solver because the new exact solver is really slow, and add modifier boolean. Okie dokie. Okay, so there's still a couple of other little things to do. So first of all, when I converted this and this into MakeTile objects, MakeTile automatically added an empty here, which is these little crosses, and that's parented the object to those crosses. Now, I don't actually want that. When this is saved to the asset library, everything is going to be parented to a single empty. So I just want to clear the parenting. So I'm just going to select that, and I'm going to press Alt and P, clear and keep transformation. Select that, Alt and P, clear and keep transformation. And then I'm just going to select those two empties, delete. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to do is, because when we converted these objects, MakeTile put them into another collection, converted objects, I just want to take them out of that collection so they're just in this arch doorway collection. This is just about keeping the scene clean. So I'm just right-clicking and clicking on Unlink. I'm going to right-click, click on Unlink, and then I can just delete all of these collections here. So everything is just in the one collection now. So the last thing to do is, when I bring this in from the asset manager, I don't really want to see these two booleans. They're just sort of cluttering up the scene, so I want them to be hidden. Normally you would hide something by pressing H and unhide it by pressing Alt and H. But when you bring a collection in from the asset browser, the objects will be unhidden. So you'll see them again. So we need to hide them in a different way. And we also need to make sure that when we render our preview, that neither of these Boolean objects appear in that render. So to do that, what we want to do is go up here to the outliner, click on the filter button, and click on the screen icon and the camera icon. And that will bring up a couple more ways of hiding things. And what we want to do is make sure that our arch Boolean and our door hinge Boolean are hidden in the viewport and also hidden in renders. Okay, and now if I press Alt-H, they're not going to appear again. Okay, so everything is now set up for me to save it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of the objects. I'm going to go to the category where I want to save this. I'm just going to create a new category for now. Let's call this example. And I'm just going to right click on my objects, and I'm going to save active objects owning collection to MakeTile library. I'm going to name this arched doorway 1 inch. Root object is going to be none. It's going to create its own root object, its own base, which everything will be parented to. Collection type is going to be architectural elements. I could do the description, whatever, but I'm not going to bother. I'm going to click on OK. Now I've got another pop-up menu because I love pop-up menus. This allows you to choose two things, one of which is the order in which the objects will be added to your tile, and that's this column. And the other one is, when you add the objects to the tile, what will happen? Will they be added to it in the normal way, or will they be subtracted from it? So there's three different options. There's union, which means add, difference, which basically is subtract, and intersect, which means delete everything except where the two objects overlap. We don't want to use that for an architectural element. So I've got my arch, I want that to be added. I've got my straight floor, I want that to be added. So that's union. And then the arch boolean, I want that to be difference, and the door hinge, that wants to be difference. And then I need to think about the order. So I want to cut a hole in the tile first. So that's arch boolean, needs to be 0. So this is programmer numbers, so everything starts from 0. I then want to add the arch, the doorway, that's 1. Then want to add the floor, so that's 2. And I then want to subtract the hinge boolean, so that's 3. Okay, and then I just click on OK. And as per usual, it will render a little preview. And you can see that now everything's been parented to an empty. And if I make a tile or drag a tile into the scene, so if I just drag that. Right, so if I just go select my arch, select my tile, right click, and add collection to tile, that works as you'd expect, as I showed you earlier. Okay, so that's how you set up a architectural element for saving to the MakeTile library. You can also add and subtract ordinary objects from your tiles. If I go to the objects and the examples, and let's say that for some reason I wanted to add a shelf with a skull onto my tile. So I'm just going to grab that and grab that there. And just make sure that they're overlapping. And actually, if I think about it, I'm going to make sure that first of all, I know how far out sort of my material is going to go. So I'm just going to make that 3D. So yeah, let's move that there. Let's say that this is an object that we want to add to our tile. It's dead easy. All you need to do is select your object and then select the tile, and then you've got add subtract object from tile. And you can choose either to union it or to subtract it, difference it. And if you click on OK, it's just going to add it to the collection and parent it to the base of the tile. So everything now moves together. Now it's worth noting that this doesn't actually use the union operator. What MakeTile is doing is it's not actually creating a modifier on here, which you might expect if you know how Blender works, where you create a Boolean modifier and then you add this as an operand and it sort of joins it all together. And the reason for doing that is frankly because Blender's Boolean modifier is rubbish. There are two Boolean solvers in Blender. There's the fast solver, which often creates errors, creates poor geometry, and sometimes fails, but it's fast. And in 2.91, they implemented the new exact solver, which often creates errors, often fails, but is 10 times slower. So I'm not entirely sure what the point of that was, but yeah, it's broken. So the way that MakeTile handles this is when it comes to fusing objects together, it does that on export. And basically what it does is it keeps all of the objects separate until export. Then it joins them all together and then it voxelizes them. So it reconstructs them out of tiny little cubes and then it remeshes over the top of that. And that's a much more reliable method of joining objects together in Blender than using the Boolean operators or the Boolean modifiers, because frankly, they're terrible. Luckily, cutting through objects, the difference operators, is much more reliable for some strange reason, even though that should be a harder thing to do. So anyway, so I'm just going to delete that off and I'm going to add, say, a cube. I'm just going to return that to preview, scale that down, move that here. And if I want to subtract a object from one of my tiles, I just again select the object, select the tile, right click, add subtract, difference, okay, boom. There we go. So it's just a quick way of doing that, and doing it this way, all it's doing is basically it's moving it into the right collection and then parenting it, making sure that the transforms and stuff are applied properly. But yeah, so that'll work when you export it. It'll have a hole cut out. That just about covers everything which is in this release. I'll be updating the documentation over the next few days. I'm going to be improving the asset manager and adding features slowly over the next few weeks and months, starting with improving the user interface so you get popovers and can navigate within categories from the nav bar. But my main focus is now going to turn back to the tile generators, specifically implementing roofs, basically, so that you can make buildings, because that's sort of the next major milestone, is implementing roofs and gables so that you can start to make entire buildings in MakeTile. Once that's done, I'll be then moving on to doing the S tiles, which are the wall-on-floor tile type, which is really useful for making the interiors of buildings or the interiors of dungeons, because you can change the width of the walls and that kind of stuff. Anyway, right, I think I've talked for long enough. Please let me know what you think. I do realise this is still a little bit rough around the edges, but I thought it was important to get this out there now, because otherwise there's a serious temptation to sort of keep on polishing, and never actually releasing anything. And I don't want to fall into that trap. Okay, right. Well, bye for now.